In this chapter, we're going to talk about the fundamentals of building industry authority. If you remember back in the SEO chapter, we're talking about the broad aspects of SEO. We brought up a few things that are going to carry down into this chapter. One of them being content. And obviously, content plays a big part in SEO, and it's definitely a big factor when it comes to building your industry authority. We're also going to talk about in detail in this chapter the fundamentals of digital PR and how that affects your authority and what that means for SEO. We're going to probably talk about a little bit about some strategies related to building up your digital PR and how you can approach that. The third piece of this authority building section is going to be about validation. We talked about validation on the SEO side. Now we're going to go into more details on what goes into that, what types of things will affect validation, and what you can do about improving that. But before we get into all this, I want to talk about how Google would analyze all this stuff. If you think about it, anybody can put content on their website. Anybody can go get other people to reference them, to cite them as a source around any amount of subject matter. Everybody's going to experience some level of validation when people come to the website. They're either going to stay and read or stay and watch, or they're going to click on things or not. That happens no matter how well your website is structured and how engaging your content is. But the question becomes is when Google's looking at all this stuff, how are they really evaluating it? And so that's where the subject of EAT comes into play. And so I'm going to go into detail on what EAT means here in a minute. But EAT is basically the overview on kind of the elements of all three of these things: content, digital PR, and validation, on how Google's analyzing these things and how they're scoring them essentially and determining whether you are an industry authority. So the next slide, I'll explain to you what EAT is. And so again, the question is, what is EAT? Okay. On your website and in your content, you need to display the following. One, experience. Okay. So experience is the level of familiarity and practical knowledge displayed on a topic within the content. Okay. So basically, you write a blog post. You can write about any topic you want, but how do you display that you have experience in that topic? We can all go to ChatGPT and get content and put it on our blog. That's the easy part. How do we come into that and display our expertise, essentially? And so there's different ways you can do this. One of them, you can add personal stories into your content. You can add case studies, hands-on demonstrations. You can review things based on your personal use, using certain words that would indicate it's coming from you and experiences you've had. You can talk about your insights on your field experience. You can get testimonials from other people that display that you have experience in this, or you can interview people, things like that. Before and after examples are good ways of doing this. Narrative-based tutorials, similar to what I'm doing right now. Field research, observations. So you're really just personalizing the content around your experience. And Google, again, is a robot. And when they're reading this stuff, they're just looking for certain words that would indicate this is from personal experience and not just factual information that you would get from like a ChatGPT. So that's the first E in EAT. And speaking of that, Google launched this structure years ago. And when they first launched it, it was just simply EAT. And they just recently added the second E, which is this experience level. And I think a lot of this has to do with the AI element of things. When Google's like, well, everybody can go out there and write content, put it out there, but AI is not going to come in with personal experience. They might try, but it's not really going to come through. And so I think Google added this experience level to counteract some of the AI content that's being pumped out left and right on websites all over the world. So that's the first E in EAT. The second E in EAT stands for expertise. Okay, so expertise is, in a specialized skill or knowledge shown in the content. So some examples of being able to display your expertise in content. Again, remember, you write a blog post, you can write about any topic you want. It could be the same topic. And now Google is going to be looking for, how is this website or authors, whoever writing this, considered an expert, so we can trust that this information is valid and accurate. And so one of them being, you can create an author profile. And when you tag yourself as the author of that blog post, your profile can list your qualifications and credentials. So if you have degrees, if you have experiences for many years in different industries, all this type of stuff you can add in there. And if somebody were to read that, they can say, you know what, this guy actually knows what he's talking about and is probably an expert. That will make this stuff trusted. And again, Google is just a robot. And so that robot's looking for certain types of words or certain things that would indicate you're an expert. And so again, your qualifications is a big one. The other types of things is just going to a lot of detail. Like, again, AI is really good at talking about any specific topic, but there's a limit to the depth of their knowledge. And so you going into the details will go a long way in that regard. Using data and research. Again, AI will quote a lot of statistics and things like that if you ask it to, but it's still not going to come from your personal experiences and your expertise on research that you've done yourself. And so make sure you try to narrate this content or include this content around statistics and things around it came from you, and not just general data that you can get from anywhere. Talking about industry standards, best practices is something that a lot of people will put in their content that displays that they have a lot of expertise in this topic. Talking about advanced tips or techniques, putting in case studies, putting in white papers, just authoring in-depth guides is just a display of your expertise. So that would be the second element of EAT, the two E's here, experience and expertise. The third element of EAT is authoritativeness. And this is a variety of things that you want to display in your content. Again, same thing applies as I said in the first two. You write a blog post. Again, AI could write about any topic on the planet. The question is how do you show that you are an authority? It's one thing to show you have experience. It's one thing to show that you're an expert. A lot of people can be an expert and never have any level of outward recognition that displays them as an authority, so there's no validation on them. And so the first thing you can do to display yourself as an authority is to showcase industry recognition or awards. So let's say you get some awards at different conferences or from your peers, things like that. You want to list that. This could be from the website level, your organization level. It also could be you as a person. Either way, having some type of awards recognition will definitely go a long way in proving that you're an authority. Publishing guest posts or getting yourself featured on other people's websites is a good way of showing you're an authority. That means other people are trusting you because you're an authority. That's usually a good validation point. And obviously that will be similar to the digital PR topic that we're going to talk about in a later lesson here. Featuring high profile clients or partnerships. This is showing that you work with the biggest and the baddest in the industry. That's an authoritative signal. Getting testimonials from industry leaders, industry thought leaders, industry experts definitely will display you as an authority. Speaking engagements at conferences or conventions will go a long ways in displaying you as an authority. Things like that, certifications, affiliates with industry organizations, even linking to those organizations from your content or linking to other experts will make you look like an authority as if you're pointing them out. Any type of endorsement from reputable sources will go a long way. All these things can exist out there for you, but if you don't put them on your website, Google's not going to know and nobody else is going to know, and therefore it devalues the content at hand because you're not considered an authority at that point. You might, again, have experience that you display. You might be able to display you're an expert, but you need to be an authority that usually comes from external sources, and so that's where the authoritative element of this comes into play. The last piece of this EAT acronym would be trustworthiness. Now, trustworthiness is a difficult thing to display, but it's not impossible. One of them, just citing your sources. So it's one thing to display your experience, your expertise, and you're an authority. But when you're in there citing sources, think about it when you were in school, you wrote reports around a topic, you always cite your sources, okay? And that's just showing that you did your research, coming from your experience, you really understand the subject matter, but you're also pointing to where you found this information to validate that it's coming from reputable sources. That makes your content more trustworthy. You also, like I mentioned before, is just having an author bio with your credentials in there. You can have author bios from other experts on your website that display that that content should be trusted. I guess just being transparent in your content goes a long ways of being trusted. offering clear and honest disclaimers. So if you have a disclaimer, like in legal content, things like that's something that people are normally see from reputable law firms and things like that. So stuff like that gives people the confidence that the people writing this content or the person writing this content is really thinking about everything in great detail and following the rules. Displaying your certification, seals, or badges from your organization or from you personally makes you more trustworthy. Adding reviews is a trustworthy signal. Providing case studies with verifiable results will go a long way as well. So EAT is experience, expertise, authoritativeness, trustworthiness. That's what they stand for. This is, again, to reiterate, is how Google is going to analyze your content and determine whether your content is worthy of being on the first page, essentially. If you think about the internet, there could be 100 people writing about a singular topic. And Google's reading all those things, and they're trying to determine who should be number one, who should be number two, who should be number 100. Everybody on that list could use AI to write 100 pieces of content. Google's going to see the same exact content. How can they determine who has the best content? And these are the types of things that they're going to be looking for. This goes to a whole nother level when you consider that there's certain categories that really can affect someone's life personally, and it makes Google afraid of featuring content from certain websites. And so how do they really know whether your content is trusted? And that's where EAT comes into play. But the other thing I want to point out just quickly is there's certain industries, and the acronym that we use in our world, SEO world, is YMYL. It stands for your money or your life. Okay. And so these are industries and sectors that affect your money or your life. And these would be like investments and finance for your money, health, medical, legal, safety, news, things like that is for your life. Now, for these categories, and for any of you franchise brands that are in these categories, this is where you really need to make sure you're doing these things in the EAT checklist, because these are the types of things where Google is really scrutinizing websites and making sure they check these boxes before determining whether you are worthy of being on page one or the top of page one or the top three. They hold these categories and these your money or your life categories to much higher standards than everybody else, which means they put more focus on analyzing those types of sites. And so there's two ways Google will analyze sites. Obviously, they're a robot. The robot's looking for certain words and badges and things like that as they're scanning your pages and website. And they're making the best determination they can whether you're checking these boxes. For some of this stuff, they actually send a person to do a review of your site, and that person has a checklist of things they're going through, and they are looking for these same four things, these four categories of things. And so when that happens, if they leave that analysis and they say, you know what, I don't trust this website, they didn't display that they're trustworthy, they may have experience, they may display that, they may maybe be an expert in this, but I don't see them being an authority. It doesn't look very trustworthy. XX. Next thing you know, your website never gets to page one. It just puts a glass ceiling on it. If somehow you've snuck into page one and somebody does one of these reviews and you're not checking these boxes, they'll actually push you out of page one down to page two or page three or wherever you end up. And so you want to have this stuff. You want to be considering this stuff. It's not good enough just to have good informational content on your website. It needs to include these things as well. And so that's why definitely putting some emphasis on explaining this. So I hope this was informative. I hope it makes sense. Just to recap this, again, EAT is the context in which Google is analyzing your content, your digital PR, and your validation to determine whether you're an industry authority. Once they determine you're an industry authority, that's when your website becomes the sky's the limit scenario where you definitely can rank number one. But in some cases, for some of those industries that are under more scrutiny, you have to really be thorough in filling these things out. In other industries, you can get away with, covering some of these things, but maybe not all of them. But just to be safe, to future-proof your business, I would ask yourself these questions and look at your website and see if you can say yes to all these, and that will go a long ways. So anyway, with that said, we'll move on to the next lesson.